So my name's Cheryl Haswell, and I'm the nurse lead for recruitment and retainment here at GHC, working with the recruitment team. We weren't testing for COVID at the time, but I had all the signs and symptoms of COVID sort of mid to late March 2020. And at the time, we were nursing COVID patients in the community hospital where I was a matron. And then about 6 weeks later, I had a relapse of symptoms, but tested negative to COVID at that 6 week relapse. But then I had COVID again in 2021 and in 2022, despite being fully vaccinated and taking the earliest opportunities to have those vaccines. After the first episode of COVID, it took me a while, but I realised that I had this really bad ongoing sinusitis, which continued with horrendous pain and really awful symptoms for up to 2 years after the first event. And I also suffered really bad dizziness, problems with my balance, headaches. I've had no smell now for 4 years. I've got limited taste, which is 4 years. But I think initially the biggest issue was the fatigue, the absolutely feeling of overwhelming tiredness. You just couldn't shake off, didn't matter how much sleep you had, you never felt any better. And that was pretty awful. I had some palpitations, I had breathlessness, and I also had particularly awful brain fog. But it did get better. They weren't all those symptoms all the time, and I'm just left at the moment with no smell, limited taste, and ongoing fatigue issues. I suppose for me, the most important thing was getting help for the sinusitis. So by going to the GP, there wasn't a long COVID service at that time set up. So I went along and had the investigations the GP put in place, chest x-ray, referral to ENT, to have a nasal scope, all those sorts of things. So I got referred on the right pathways that sort of addressed the major issues, but none of them addressed the fatigue. The great news is the dizziness and the balance issue lasted about a year, then it got better, and that was a huge relief. The headaches have got better when the sinus issues resolved, so that was good. The fatigue has got better over time, but it is still there. It's not like the overwhelming fatigue I had when it first started having in the first 6 months, but it's still there. I still have to pace myself. The breathlessness has got better. I say I'm nearly back to where I was, but that has been a lot of effort to get there. And the brain fog is definitely better as well. I think that was worse in the first year after the symptoms. So I suppose what I'm saying is there is hope that your symptoms can get better and you can improve with time. And that was one thing I never accepted, that I was going to be like this forever. I wanted to ensure that I believed that this was only temporary. So I have adapted my work-life balance. I was in a position that I was able to retire, and I took early retirement, and then I started working as a bank nurse for recruitment and retainment. And by adapting and reducing my hours, that's definitely helped with the fatigue, and it also enables me to pace my activities throughout the week. So what I don't do anymore is plan too much and fit too much in the weekend in particular. What I do is I pace myself. And when I learnt the meaning of the word pace, it meant a lot to actually recognise you are going to get fatigued. And when you are fatigued, you just need to rest. I'm very lucky. I'm married to a nurse, so he fully understood. And during the COVID, he was identified as highly vulnerable, so he had to shield. So there was a real understanding of that, and he's been very supportive. Again, with work colleagues, I don't mention it very much anymore because people don't seem to have an understanding. I'm not sure they really understand it. And I suppose I just try not to talk about it unless it's affecting, maybe I'm having a difficult day and I just say, oh, the long COVID's playing out. I really need to limit what I do today. So I suppose from a mental health point of view, I didn't have major problems, but I just very fed up in the beginning. It was, was it just being fed up of COVID? Was it being fed up of the symptoms? Felt very emotional particularly in that first year. It was just really difficult. But from a resilience point of view, I would say that my resilience was quite low, and it was quite difficult to get that emotional resilience at time when you were going through the long COVID in the beginning. It's got better. But once again, you learn to live with it and you deal with it differently. And I went to the long COVID support group that was offered by the trust, and I found that helpful to talk to people. And it was quite interesting who had similar symptoms and were feeling the same way. But the other thing that I did, I joined the Fifth Sense charity group, which is for people with no smell and limited taste. And that was really helpful because I managed to attend a conference there, and to be with people with all the same problems was just quite enlightening, and it just made you feel you're not alone. And for some people it can improve, it might not, you might have to live with it, but it's just a different way. So I think the mental health bit got better when you learnt the acceptance that you've got a problem, but it may not last forever. Yeah, I suppose usually I'm not a great person for joining groups. I'm not a group person. But I just find it really helpful to go along and listen to people, even if I said nothing. And it was interesting that later on in the group that maybe I was able to give people some hope that things might get better in the future because we were all on a different part of our journey. And I thought that was quite helpful. And the group evolved very differently over time. So I suppose the worst possible thing when you've got long COVID is when someone says, "Oh, you look really well." And you're thinking, "Oh my goodness, you have no idea that, behind your face it hides a lot." So if you know someone with long COVID, the best thing is not to say, "Oh, you look well." It's just to give them the chance to say how they're feeling. But if you're going to ask them, really listen. And don't just have it as a giveaway line of "How are you today?" If you're not prepared to listen, someone with long COVID may give a very different answer. I think for me, it was just people who were supportive of me when I wasn't feeling well. Is there anything I can do to help? Or can we change the meetings around, making sure you're not got back-to-back meetings all the time? All those sort of like practical things that make things a little bit easier. And you know the people you can confide in and within your teams that can help you do that. And I think there's some more than others. And it's just having that good working relationship, isn't it? I think, some people have still got long COVID symptoms. A lot of people have moved on and they just don't even think about it anymore. And I just think that, just increase the awareness. If someone says they have got it, understand how it affects them, because there's so many different symptoms people have and it affects people very differently. And just ask, what does that mean to you? What do I need to do to support you for you to be at work, or for you to be able to come out and socialize, and just try and make those adjustments.